What's up, friends, family, and other creatures of the sea? Today we have a new episode of How Do I Beat This? Today we're going to be looking at a couple of things, but we'll start with a 17 pool by a Zerg player. Then we'll go into a Mech game, and after that we'll follow up with a 1-base Cyclone all-in, I believe. I haven't actually seen the games yet, but I'm excited to dive into them. Now we have Mr. Zlin, who I'm not sure what his MMR is, as this is an older replay. Who's opening up with a 1-gate expand, so a standard Protoss build order, one that I've done a guide on many times, at least with this opener. And he's facing a Zerg who's opening with a 17 pool, 17 gas, delayed natural base. Now, in theory, Zerg can play a macro game from this, but most of the time they're going to be all-inning. But of course you don't know that, so you can't just blindly build a robotics facility and start pumping out immortals. You want to continue the game as you would normally do without any weird openers. You know, you just want to basically play your standard Stargate majority of the time, right? So first thing to note is that this probe, once the pool finishes, needs to be over here to see how many larvae there is available. He would see 3 larvae available and thus be able to deduct that most likely once the pool finishes and these 3 turn into things, that it's going to be links. Now, funnily enough, you don't actually care too much about that, as you're going to continue with your build as usual. A common mistake is to build a zealot and then to get supply blocked at 23-23, which is exactly what we're going to see. Not be able to get a gas easily, and you'll need to wall with a gateway, delaying your tech, basically delaying your whole life, and then you still die against the all-in. So you might be able to defend the first links, but you'll die to the follow-up. What you do want to do is you want to build a Stargate over here to start with. So you have a full wall. Get an Adept, chrono boost it out, and if your Adept is not on time, just full wall this with a pylon temporarily until the Adept is out. Then cancel that pylon once your Adept is out, or once you feel safe enough. Do need to cancel that pylon, it's very important. Then you can get a second Adept, or you can get a second Stalker, and you can scout with your first Adept, or you can leave it at home, or you could scout with your probe that still should be alive on the other side of the map. Now, to go back to that probe thing, after you scout how many larvae are being turned into links, you run away with your probe, and you can hide it over here, for example. This is a perfect location. And then at around 3 minutes, you just come back here to check what is coming out of the Zerg. You can see if he has a third base, maybe there's roaches running around across the map, maybe it's just more links, maybe it's link bane, who knows. 3 minutes, 3:20 is a good time to figure that out. Now, of course, this is a lot of things to do, so maybe you just want to hide your probe to not lose it, and then, you know, work towards it in steps. Not everything has to go perfect, but this definitely isn't the way. Let's continue the replay for a bit to see some more exact timings. Like I said, at 3 minutes, you should be able to see the roaches. If you just patrol your probe over here, if he comes back with the links to kill your probes, that's fine. You at least will be able to see if there's a third base or not. And with your Adept, you should be able to shade into the main as well, scouting-wise. And then you can get a Void Ray or an Oracle into a Void Ray, and you get a full wall while continuing gateway production. So that all sounds very nice, of course, but it's always a lot easier to show you guys exactly how to do it, rather than to just talk about what to do. So I'll show you guys exactly how I would do it if I was in this exact same situation. So I'll play as the Protoss. Here we go. Now, of course, this means the Zerg won't be actually attacking me, but just to get a feeling of how you should be doing it. See how many spaces I leave here. Actually, is this correct? Oops, I might have messed it up. Okay. We're gonna rewind real fast because this initial wall is incorrect. I'll tell a bit more about that later at the end of it. But trust me, I'm a smart person. Okay. We get a Nexus. So ideally you want 3 spaces here, so you can re-wall with a Cyber Core. Well, because the person who sent me this replay placed this initial pylon a bit too far back, that's most likely not possible. So instead what we will be doing is, we're just going to leave 2 spaces, which will still be fine for a pylon. So we just continue our build as normal. So you get gas at 21, then you get a second pylon at 22 most likely. Now our probe should be over here already. I'm still getting used to the hotkeys this guy had set, so that's why it's a little difficult for me as well. Now, get into gas with as many workers as possible. And here you'll see I start my adept. I will full wall this area with a Stargate. Or well, full wall. I'll finish this part of the wall. And then if the links show up, I'll do this. And you should always be in time with that. If you put in gas fast enough for the Stargate. Now, once the adept is out, you cancel the pylon. You chrono boost your second unit. And I like to move my adept across the map. You can, of course, if he tries to run by with links, always wall again. I'll start my warp gate. I'll see, hey, there's no third base here. That's weird. If I see a third base, I'll just return back home with my adept. And I'm like, alright, that's cool. If I don't see a third base, I continue walking. And I most likely get another adept. And I sacrifice my first adept for information. So at this point, I want to know, hey, what's coming? If I see roaches, I'll immediately start a void ray. And I'll start a full wall. Put this one behind it. Full wall. Battery. Quit pro production altogether. If you see roaches or a baneling bust. If it's a baneling bust, instead of a void ray, you just get mass oracle. And just continue walling against the baneling bust, right? Just keep making a bigger wall. And that's the way, the easiest way to defeat this build. Stargate in the wall. Into a full wall and just continue the build as normal basically. Scout with that first adept. Give it up if you don't see a third base with the probe. Now I want to show you guys exactly what I meant with this good man's wall. So okay, so what you could do, hey, come back. Oh, whoop. The way I would prefer walling on a map like this could be something like this. The graphics are also slightly different from what I usually have, but we should be able to figure it out. So you see this gate, then we can build a third building here in theory. This should also be a gateway here. So you build a gate here. This is how you ideally want to construct all your walls, with 3 big buildings and then still having the ability to wall behind those 3 buildings in this area with another 3x3 building. The reason it needs to be a 3x3 building is because these build faster. Now, you might think, what do I want to wall? Do I want to build a forge? Do I want to build a gateway or a cybercore? You always want to build a cybercore. They're the same price. A cybercore has more HP and it has a lower build time, which means it gains HP faster. To show that in practice, for the slow learners, I will show you guys. I will first start this gateway. Wow. And then start this cybercore, and you'll see the cybercore gets his HP and his shield way quicker, even though it started after the gateway. Well, it's basic mathematics, percentages and that kind of stuff. I think you learn it when you're 8. So you guys should be able to do it as well. Alright, let's head on to the mech game. Wish me luck, boys. Let's just skip the early parts. It's usually with mech. It is more about the engagements and unit composition than anything else. Like, I could nitpick about the build order. It's obvious to me this isn't a very tight build order. Third pylon is way too early for that. Second unit is probably too slow. Moving out on the map against a double gas opener with your first stalker is probably always a mistake. Not having a robotics facility is also kind of dangerous. Not having any scouting info whatsoever is a bit yikesy. All these things, but I'm gonna kind of skip that for now, as usually it's not the most important thing in mech games. I haven't watched this yet, but most of the time, I can tell you guys, that's not what really matters. What really matters are army composition and the way you engage into a mech army and how you play around the mech army. Mech armies are slow. They're very vulnerable while moving. They're honestly quite bad while moving. They suck while moving. They are expensive units, not easily replaceable. They suck when split up, except maybe Hellions against Zealots. But there's a lot of weaknesses to mech, which are important to abuse. So third base on the way. economy is relatively even, all of that stuff we're just gonna skip. We're really just gonna focus on how do we want to fight against a mech army. And usually how we want to fight against a tank-based mech army is with charge lot, is with immortals, and it's with archons. And very, very little stalkers, because stalkers deal extremely poorly with tanks. Unless tanks are moving, even then, tanks of course have extra damage versus armored, and stalkers, as we all know, are armored. So they do that full damage, and especially when sieged up, they do an absolute metric ton of damage. So be careful there. Ideally, we'd just be warping in zealots at this point already. If you have these 5 stalkers and maybe 8 zealots here, I think you'd absolutely be able to clean up this army if you get charge. If you have this with this many stalkers, you probably won't be able to clean up this army quite as easily. I think you'll be able to do it, but you probably get bigger losses. So charge lot always #1 priority. That's #1 priority for sure. Immortals, actually charge lot, archons, and then immortals. Immortals are kind of like the last priority, but charge lot and archons are the #1. I was gonna say, another nice thing to do with charge lot is that you can set up engagement very well from the back. And this kind of thing is extremely important as well. You always want to sync them up, of course. Come from 2 locations at the same time. And makes this kind of fight a lot easier. I'm not sure why he cancelled this Nexus, but I don't think it's gonna matter actually too much. He's gonna clean this up. Major Spaniel is gonna clean this up very easily. And he set up a good engagement, had enough charge lots. You see, if you flank and if you have enough charge lots to get on top of the tanks, it doesn't really matter if he has 8 tanks or 12 tanks or 6 tanks. Like, he's just gonna die, basically. If there's a couple of allins in front and those are tanking the zealots, you don't have enough to get to the tanks, then you'll most likely lose. Now, the way to play against Mech is to get a high economy, so more bases than your opponent, more workers than your opponent. And then the moment he moves out, you either fight or you base trade. You can play a mass stalker style, but then you need to be very focused on having extremely high economy, because you want to replace your stalkers a lot, and you do a lot of base trading moves, blinking into the main, that kind of stuff. I would not recommend this unless you're low to mid grandmaster. Up until that level, I think the easiest and the best thing to do is always going to be to play a charge lot archon style. I also think that's the best thing to do at a higher level, but sometimes you can put in some more base trading elements with stalker forces, but that is really quite advanced. And if you're going to be focusing on that, if you're platinum or diamond, you're most likely going to be focusing on the wrong things. As we see, Major Spaniel is doing all these cool moves with his army, but meanwhile he's just down 4 workers. Against Terran, ideally you want to be up 10 workers once they get a 3rd base. You probably should have a 4th base on the way already, and all he should be doing is chrono boosting probes and chrono boosting upgrades, nothing else. Getting a Templar Archives. The only reason you would get a Robo Bay is if your opponent plays Cyclone Hellion. In that case, you might want to get either Colossi or Disruptors. Or if there's a lot of Widow Mines, maybe get a Disruptor or 2 to clear up those Widow Mines a little easier. But in general, don't get Disruptors or Colossus. Just get Charge Lot, Archons, Immortals. That's really all you're going to need. Set up proper engagements and you're going to be completely fine. Trust me on that. So like I said, this kind of moves are really cool. But if you're not high level enough, this is what's going to happen. You're going to be doing cool moves, killing 3 workers. Well, instead of killing those 3 workers, you also could have produced 25 workers yourself by properly chrono boosting, getting those extra bases, which is always going to be the main priority. Always going to be the main priority against Mech. So even though the units lost is relatively equal here, we see Major Spaniels just down 20 supply for no reason except worse macro, basically. I don't mind this transition, but I don't mind this transition if you're on 5 bases and on 10 gas, and you already have 12 or 16 gates, and you have 160 supply of army, you have 80 or 75 probes, then the triple Stargate transition is good. If you're on 56 probes, you're barely mining from 5 gas, you have 2 robos, but the only army you have is 6 stalkers. This is not a good transition. This is not the army you need. You need a backbone in your army. Sometimes this will work. Like, people probably will tell me, hey, but whenever I get my 5 carriers out, I always win. I'm sure that's the case, but there's such a big window between now and having 5 or 6 carriers out that a lot of the time you will most likely also die. I'm sure if you get the carriers, a lot of the time you're gonna win, but you're also gonna die a lot trying to get the carriers. It's a lot safer to get into that Immortal Charge Slot Archon composition initially. Just take those good engagements. Another thing against Mech that you wanna keep in mind of, that Hellion run-bys are their main tool of harassment. Which means if you cover all the ground paths with vision, it's gonna be a lot easier to deal with. That's why you wanna keep the towers, this tower, this tower. Then you basically cover the whole map. You could put a pylon over here, you could put a pylon here. You could put a pylon here and a pylon here, and then all of a sudden you have complete vision of the map. Just like that. Mech armies are very slow to move out. Whenever mech armies move out, they're usually all in, or they're gonna try to do a lot of damage. It's their one fight, basically. Unlike Bio, which has a lot of map presence, which means if you put anything on the map, it's gonna be there until he most likely moves out with his main army, or until a harassment squad of Hellions sees it. But Hellions are extremely slow at killing buildings, so if he wastes a minute with 4 Hellions killing a pylon, that's just good news for you. It means that could have been 20 probes as well. It's a lot better to lose a pylon than 20 probes. Another good thing about having a lot of vision is that you can park a prism over here, for example, and the moment you see your opponent move out, you just fly into your opponent's main base and you just warp in 5 zealots. Or you just send 3 zealots over here to try and do some damage. There's so many... I keep saying this every episode of how do I beat this. It's so important to have vision around the map. People really underestimate the value of vision. I see it in high level games all the time as well. And here, I mean, these 4 Hellions now all of a sudden become a massive threat, right? If they would be going in here, that could be really dangerous. It could lose 15, 20 probes. And in Major Spaniel's case, that is like 25%, maybe even more. 33% of his probe supply, so always got to be careful. Now he went from Mass Stalker into Void Ray into Carrier, which most likely is just gonna straight up lose against the Tor tank push. Here come the Hellions, a lack of vision, he loses a bunch of probes, not as many as I thought, but still losing any probes in his economic situation is not very helpful. And finally he gets some Zealots, some Immortals. He also has Carriers, which is of course nice, but you're gonna need more than that. Once again, the reason why I say Charge Slot Archon Immortal is Immortal and Zealots to deal with the tanks and Thors, and then you have your Archons to deal with the Hellbats, with the Hellions. Tank, they tank a lot, don't forget about that. They tank a lot of tank shots, extremely good at tanking, Archons are. So that's why it's really the perfect army composition. It's also a very natural balance between Zealots and Archons, where Zealots require only minerals and Archons mainly require gas, of course. So here we have Major Spaniel being completely unaware of where his opponent is moving. Once again, the vision playing an important role here in this game. If he knew about this vision, maybe he could set up a good engagement. It's a lot easier to set up an engagement if you're aware where your opponent's army is. You could maybe set up some forces from here, some forces from here. But if you need to start setting up the engagement, if he's already in your base, it becomes a lot harder. Then even someone like Cyril might have trouble doing that. Yeah, here the engagement that Major Spaniel takes is basically just a straight A move into a full mech army. Now, the air units most likely will be able to survive. And he might be able to clean up this army, but look at the economic damage that was done here. A couple of workers, I think, went down again. The 3rd base will fall. So even though they traded armies, Major Spaniel revealed his hand of Carrier Void Ray. He has no good money to rebuild a proper army. And his opponent has a way better economy and already has a lot of mines finished. Now, once you're into Carriers, which is the eventual composition, and your opponent starts playing Mass Mine or Mine Tor, what you want to do is you want to get a combination of Immortals and Disruptors on the ground. Immortals to deal with the Thors, and Disruptors to deal with the mines. Disruptor shots on top of mines do a lot of damage. They kill them at once, and they can kill many at once. So it's a lot better than Storm. Carriers, of course, don't do too well against mines, so I would suggest not firing with your Carriers until the majority of the mines have disappeared. You also need some detection with your army. An Observer, for example, is very useful. Now, here we see what happens when you don't have Disruptors and you're not running away fast enough. This is a very silly looking chase, but I mean, if you don't have Disruptors or any real ground, it's going to be very difficult to fight this. So It looks silly and it's all good fun, of course. All making fun of someone else. It's yeah, disruptors really is the way here. Observers, disruptors, having good vision on the map, anticipating where the mines will come from, is all extremely helpful. And then fill up the rest of that army with some immortals to deal with those Thors. Immortals do a lot of damage to Thors, of course, very helpful. So yeah, that's gonna be your main toolkit dealing with Mech. Initially, Chartlot Archon Immortal. Eventually, you might want to do a carrier switch, and then if he gets mines, you get disruptors. Just think logically. Try to think logically about what counters what. Like, why do I build certain units versus certain things? And a lot of these things, they're quite common sense if you think about it. Like, you know, Archons to deal with the Hellbats, Zealots to deal with the tanks, get close on tanks real fast, and Immortals for general DPS against armored units, which Thors and tanks both are. So, and we can watch out the rest of the game, but it's not going to be that interesting. So we'll hop into the final game of the day, which is going to be a Cyclone all-in, I believe. Nathani is a North American Terran streamer / caster who's known for his mech builds as well. But this time, from what I read, is that it's going to be a 1-base Cyclone push. Now, so in this case, we're going to be focusing a bit more on the opening, as that's what's really going to be important here. Whenever you scout double gas as Protoss, always be wary of quick pushes from the Terran opponent. And I'd suggest opening up with a robotics facility as a result of that. Something like Adept, Stalker into robotics facility. You can also play Stargate. It's a little more tricky to play, but robotics facility is very easy to play. It transitions nicely into a faster 3-gate. I think it has a lot of potential for this. So we see I think this might have been a core first. No, just actually Nexus before core. So very standard. Stalker into Warp Gate. And the one thing I would suggest to not do is to get Blink against an opener like this. Simply because you don't know what's coming. And it's very difficult to figure out what's coming because you're not going to be able to scout for a long time. So you need something that's stable against everything. Now, okay, it does get Twilight. I actually didn't watch the replay before, so I didn't know that. But one of the reasons why I think Robo is so good is because you can play something like Sentry, Stalker, Robo, or you can play Sentry, Robo, or Stalker, Robo, Sentry. Then you scout with the hallucination. And you just get a very... You easily go into the 3 gates, you can get a battery, and it doesn't matter too much with Robo. Like, you can continuously build probes, you get your observer first, and you can basically get a lot of units very easily as well. And the moment something funky is happening, instead of having to wait all the way for Blink, you can just run out a Prism in case it's Cyclone, or you can get an Immortal if you prefer to deal with it that way. The problem with Blink is that it becomes useful so late in the game that against a 1-basing Terran, if it is a 1-basing Terran, it's going to be completely useless. And that's why whenever you see 2 gas, I'd almost always recommend Robotics Facility or Stargate. As these techs, they kick in quicker, basically. Like a Stargate unit, after you build it, you can use it. Blink, you need to wait for 2 minutes and you need to put 5 chrono boosts on it, and it still takes eons. You know, your opponent will be dancing on your grave at that point already. So here we have just a little bit of a case of, well, basically a wrong build order, I would say, against what his opponent opened. Now, that's not to say that with better micro, he wouldn't be able to win, but it's just difficult to actually win, even with better micro, just because you don't have the right composition for it. Of course, Cyclones have Mech Field Accelerator as well, so I'm not going to be picky about micro, or he could have built more batteries, he could have built an extra gate, that kind of stuff. Of course, he could have built more batteries, of course he could have built an extra gate, but that's not really the point here. The point here is that he made bad decisions in the early game. So instead of me just talking about everything that went wrong, how about I show what I think he could have done better. So I will just take over here, and we're gonna just take some benchmarks, basically. Let's do that first, all right? This is what you always want to be doing when you struggle with something. So imagine you have a Cyclone build you struggle with, like this guy did, like Octomologist messaged me. I was like, hey, I struggle with this. Then you start benchmarking for yourself. Like, hey, 325 was the first Stalker. Or it was the first Cyclone with 1 Marine. So you write 325, 1 Cyclone, 1 Marine, 6 SCVs. So you can write this down. I usually do it in a notepad. And then you keep watching, you keep watching, you keep watching. Then 4 minutes. 3 Cyclones. Plus the previous stuff. So like plus the Marine and the 6 SCVs in theory. Now these are most likely going to be the 2 most important benchmarks, right? We have the initial timings. If we hold these 2 little timings, we're gonna be fine. Also important to note, whenever you try to find a reaction to something, is that our opponent is basically all in. There's no natural base, right? Absolutely no natural base. He's pulling a lot of SCVs. We have a natural base. We have more workers. We have better infrastructure. If we survive this, we practically win the game. So then you tell yourself, all right, so how much can I sacrifice? Well, in theory, you can sacrifice all the probes in your natural, or at least a lot of them, up until down maybe 27, something like that. So we're gonna have a look. I will write these things down myself as well, real quick on paper. 325 and 4, 1 Cyclone, 3 Cyclone. And then we take over from here. So how I would approach this situation is, obviously I'd continue with the build order, the same way this guy was. I try to keep this probe alive, first of all, very important, for 2 reasons. First of all, it's 50 minerals, thumbs up for the 50 minerals. Second of all, it can scout for us later on in the game, which is also important. Okay, nice. Now, I would open up with an Adept, because it allows for faster tech. Yeah, basically have less gas spent. Because, 25 less gas. This probe can now go to scout. I will chrono boost out another unit. I don't chrono boost probes at this point. I don't think that's going to be very helpful for me. Now, of course, I've already scouted the barracks, the 2 gas. Most likely going to be a factory coming up as well. I would like to get as many gateway units as possible early on. And we're slowly but surely approaching that first point where the first Cyclone comes in, right? So first Cyclone, I think if I have 2 or 3 gateway units, I'm gonna be completely fine to deal with that, in my mind. Now I get an observer to get some extra scouting information. I can position myself at the ramp a bit. Don't necessarily. And 325, here comes the first Marine and the Cyclone with the 6 SCVs. So in case a Cyclone locks onto one of my units, I try to micro that unit back and I attack the Cyclone with my other units. Now I know that it's Cyclones. I start an Immortal and I chrono boost it. Hell, he probably pulled some SCVs. Can add a battery, can add another battery. 35 workers, that's plenty. Why would I need more? Hell, I can build another battery. Maybe reinforce with another pylon as well. Now, I know it's Cyclones, so if I'm a bit on the ramp, that's probably better for me. My warp gate finishes. Here come the 3 Cyclones at 4 minutes. Now I'm trying to move back, move back. Immortal comes in, and I have a warp in of Stalkers. And about 10 seconds after the 2 extra Cyclones arrive, I have 5 Stalkers, 1 Immortal, and an Adept, 3 batteries on the way. I could continue Immortal production or get a what do you call it? A prism if I want to pick up units. Don't forget that, of course. Against Cyclones, you can pick up your units that are being locked onto to break the lock on. However you want to deal with it. And you have 3 gateways to continuously warp in. Now, you might lose 1 or 2 units early to the first Cyclone, but once you got the Immortal and you got the 3 extra Stalkers, you should be completely fine to deal with it. So, I hope that helps. I also hope that helps in next time when, if you have any problem with any build, on how to approach it yourself. If you enjoyed this episode of How Do I Beat This, please leave a thumbs up down below. Comment something down. Flame me for all I care. It helps feed the algorithm, and that helps my videos being shown to more people, which is great for me and hopefully also great for everyone involved. So yeah, please also feel free to subscribe. That also helps me a lot. Thank you all for watching. I appreciate it all, and see you boys next time. Bye bye.